Well, blessed Monday to you for our daily encouragement. And I apologize, I didn't have any for Thursday or Friday. I was doing a little research on this passage. There's a lot going on here in chapter 11, and you'll see that in chapter 11, 12, and 13. Probably some of the more interesting of the book of Revelation, probably the core of where we get into our disagreements about exactly what's going on here. And I'm going to return again to chapter 11, verses 1 through 3, because there's a lot of things that we need to be discussing here. So let me read again chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. This is not a repeat, so just to make sure that you are listening here. Then I was given a measuring rod. And remember, this is John who is now eaten the scroll, so that he is now a participant in this vision. He's not just an observer. And so he was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, come and measure the temple of God and the altar of those who worship there. And so we're to measure the temple of God, and measuring means judging. And usually the measuring rod would come short. In the prophet Ezekiel, they would show that what was measured was not sufficient for what is happening, but you'll find that this measurement is perfect. And it says, but do not measure the court outside the temple, but leave it out, for it is given to the nations, and they will trample over the holy city for 42 months. Now, I want to talk about the 42 part of it, but it says that outside of the temple there will be a trampling, or should I say, destruction for 42 months. And that's because the temple of God is perfect, but the outer courts are not. They have not achieved perfection. In fact, they are going to go through a time of tribulation. Now, 42 months, if we divide it by 7, is and a half. And so what we're the reason I'm sorry, if we take 42 months and divide it by 12, it will be 3.5. And the reason we're dividing it by 12 is a time measurement. 3.5 is 3.5 years. 42 months would be 3.5 years. Maybe you may know that numbering because a lot of times sentences, for punishment are usually done by months, not by years. And so 3.5 is also half of 7. And the reason why that is important is because 7 is considered the perfect number, but it is also the number of years of tribulation or destruction that is going on. So we're talking about half of that time. Now, as we talk about 3.5, many people have argued, if they take this very literally, that they would say that this is when the temple of God is established. Some argue that the rapture doesn't take place before tribulation, it takes place halfway into the 7 years of destruction. And so they argue that this is when the temple was built in the middle time. But the trouble we have, if we take this literally and chronologically, is that we're going to encounter some more 42 months or 3.5s. We're going to encounter it in chapter 12. We're going to encounter it in chapter 13. Now, if we just add 11 and 12, we'd say, okay, 3.5, 3.5, that adds up to 7. But what about this third 3.5 that appears in Revelation 13? So we might say that doesn't add up to 7, that adds up to 10.5, and that isn't a number that we're working with. So many have argued that the number is more symbolic. In the middle of the great destruction, in the middle of the years that have been assigned for difficulty, tribulation in the world, God is building a temple. And so that has been more the symbolic interpretation. It is not necessarily a rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. Some argue that. It is more the building of the temple of the people of God. More symbolic, very similar to Hebrews, where the people of God are together, Mount Zion, In the middle of trial and tribulation, there is an unseen kingdom, an unseen temple made up of people that is being built. And this would be very consistent with the specific churches, the seven churches that John talks about at the beginning of the book. There may be seven churches in specific places, but we're all part of one temple that is measured to be perfect, that is surrounded by the outside world, the Gentiles, the nations who are attacking it. Now, some have argued that this is an improper interpretation because if it's the temple, then it's the Jewish people. If it's the nations, then it's those who are not saved by the evangelism of the church. Now, I don't agree with that interpretation, but that's just one way that people have taken this verse. But we need to focus on these things because they are specific and are called for our encouragement. And so it says, but do not measure the outside court, but leave it for the nations. They will trample on the holy city for that 3.5 years. And I will grant my 2 witnesses authority to prophesy for 1,260 days, wearing sackcloth. And that's just another way to divide up that 42 months. It is the way to talk about what the witness of God will be. And remember, we have hymns that stress that. Day by day, we talk about our faith. And in fact, when we're going through suffering, it is not, we don't think in years anymore, we don't think in months anymore, we think of day by day. And some have argued that the 2 witnesses, they could either be Moses or Elijah. Some have even thought that it was Peter and Paul. Now, one of the more interesting arguments is the word and the sacraments, that they are the witness of the holy temple. They are the witnesses of the church. And symbolically, we have that in front of our congregations. We usually have a pulpit, and then off to the side is an altar. Or should I say, at least at one of my congregations, you have a pulpit and then you have the sacrament of baptism on one side of it and the altar on the other side of it. That these are the 2 witnesses. And they're called to witness with sackcloth. That's a remembrance of repentance. Why are they remembering in sackcloth? Because the nations are bombarding them. The nations are coming against them. And so they are witnesses in the midst of trials and tribulation. So, my friends, remember these symbols in the midst of your trials and tribulation. There is a witness, a perfect witness. It is up in heaven. It is a witness to the things of God. And it is symbolically represented here in Revelation chapter 11. Take care. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow as we continue to study the book of Revelation. Take care.